Welcome back to the channel folks, and to one of a series of videos on how to paint bolt action. And before I get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Overlord Games, who supplied all the sprues for this series so far. They're friends of the channel and they support the events that we help to run, and if you want to check them out yourself, you can find them in a link in the description below. In the tutorials, I'm going to be following my usual layering approach, which is all about getting a high contrast bright finish for the figure so that it really stands out well on the tabletop. I hope you'll find this series interesting and useful and give you a few ideas for your own painting. Don't forget to check out the playlist on the channel for painting bolt action, where you'll find these tutorials and many others. For each guide, you will find a list of the paints that I used in the description, and if you've got any questions, just stick them down in the comments and I will get back to you. Looking for help in painting your wargame collection? Well, here at Panzerschüler we have 15 years experience in offering commission painting services. So if you have a project in mind and you'd like to discuss it with us, then get in touch at the email address you'll see on screen just now. Our schedule is always busy, but we're always looking for new customers. We paint full time, which means when we start your project, we're 100% committed to that project and won't start another one until it's done. Our clients can be found all over the world, so we're very experienced in making sure that your completed project is properly packed and safely sent on. If you would like to know more, get in touch by email, give us some details of the project that you're planning, and we'll get back to you with a quote and potential indication of timescales. Thank you for your time. Now let's get back to this painting tutorial. So the subject of this guide is going to be the Armies of Germany giveaway figure Josef Sepp Allerberger. Whilst this figure has some unique elements, it also has got a strong focus on the uniform, on German Fieldgrey, and that will be the main focus of this tutorial. Now I've given the whole figure an undercoat of olive brown. That's going to be the shade coat, and we're going to be layering up from there using suitable Fieldgrey colours. And I'm starting on the tunic with dark mud. Now what I'm doing here to begin with is mapping out the shape of the figure. So by that I mean I'm going to block in the raised areas, not painting too tightly or too accurately. That's going to come in the next stage, because you're always going to need to put down 2 coats of paint for a nice smooth opaque finish. So here we're just going to start by mapping out, blocking in. It's almost like painting by numbers, folks. It is quite as simple as that. The various prominent shapes that the sculptor has placed on the figure for us to see. Things are always going to look very dark at this stage, but don't be put off by that if you're going to try this layering approach, because we're going to be getting lighter and lighter with each layer of paint that we put on. Now I'm using Panzer Ace's dark mud here, which might sound like a bit of a strange colour to use, but it just happens to be a very good shade for the Fieldgrey uniforms, and there's so many different shades of colours that you could use for this. So this is not an exact guide of colours that you should be choosing, but just to give you an idea of how you can use different shades of similar colours to get a nice overall sort of battle-worn look. Now here I'm adding the second coat of the main colour, the dark mud, and I am using this coat not only to give a more opaque and smooth finish, but I'm also going to start refining the amount of shade that's going to be left, because the shade is only there as an accent. It should only be there to help define the shape of the figure. And by defining that shape, I'm talking about, for instance, internal shade and external shade. So the external shade is going to be the shade that we're going to leave between, for instance, the cuff and the hand, or the neck and the collar, or the tunic and the trousers. And then internal shade is going to be shade around pockets, in the deep folds of the elbow, of the shoulders and the hems and so on. But always remember to tightly control the amount of shade that you're leaving, otherwise it's going to become a dominant feature, a dominant colour, and we really just need it to be an accent that will play off against the subsequent highlights that we're going to paint on. And here I am applying that highlight, and I'm using green grey for this. It's one of my go-to colours for highlighting pretty much everything that's green, because it gives a lighter edge but not a brighter edge, and that's important when you're highlighting, that you don't give things a sort of neon sheen. You want to make it stand out and give it depth, but not make it glow. Now, just as with the shade, it's important that the highlight is just an accent. It's not the dominant colour. It's just going to play off against the shade to give us a strong contrast and a strong shape. And I'm going to be applying it to the edges of hems, edges of pockets, collars, to the highest points on the folds of the uniform and such likes. But if you do too much, it'll end up looking too stripy, so you've got to keep it in balance, and this helps us create the depth and contrast that we need to make the figure pop on the tabletop. Now let's do the same with a different field grey option for the cap and trousers. So I've selected from my rack of paints German Field Grey 2 from Panzer Aces. I'm not sure if you can even get this anymore, folks, but the particular colour itself is not important. It's just choosing something which is field grey but different from the tunic to get a varied and battle worn look over the whole figure. I'm working over the same olive brown shade colour because that is my go-to colour for any figures that are basically green. And I'll be following the mapping and then filling in stages, controlling the shade in that final stage. Remember, that's a very important point. Now, it's important not to use the same highlight colour that I did for the tunic on the trousers and the cap. Even though we've got a different base colour, it's only a little bit different. If we go in with the same highlight, it's going to blend those two colours together. That may give you a better overall finished look, sort of more uniform, quite literally, but we don't want that here. We want to be able to see the two different tones of field grey. So I'm going to be using Panzer Aces Afrika Korps Tank Crew, and we'll carefully apply that as we did with the green grey, making sure it's just an accent, making sure we're not having it as a dominant colour, otherwise it's just going to lighten the whole thing up and basically lose the contrast that we're trying to achieve. And hopefully you can see here how we have got something that looks very much like field grey uniform but has got a bit more going on. It is just not the one colour top to bottom, and that can be a great way of adding a little bit more interest and depth to your German field grey. It's basically a fairly dull kind of colour, let's face it, folk, that's what it's supposed to be, but this way you can help the figure stand out a little bit more against each other. You can be mixing the colours up, or you can be having some figures that are all of one colour or all of another tone, if you see what I mean, and get a nice varied looking force of Germans together. But let's have a look at some of the other elements unique to this figure and common to all of your German field grey based troops. Starting with the bread bag, I've left a shade coat of olive brown around the outside of the bag just to frame it against the figure, but the bag itself has now got a shade coat of US Field Drab. And then the main colour is going to be old wood, and here you can see me using Iraqi sand as the highlight colour. The gaiters are a base coat of green grey and a highlight of Splinter Camo base from Panzer Aces, and we're going to be keeping the same olive brown shade coat. Now the webbing and the straps are black leather, so I've painted them black, and then I'm going to use a colour from Panzer Aces. This is German Tank Crew Highlight. It's a sort of greenish brown kind of colour, but it works very well as a worn edge on black leather items such as this. The water bottle has been given a shade coat of German Camo medium brown, any similar brown will do, and then a lighter coat as the main coat, in this case US Field Drab. Now the boots and all the metallic areas such as on the weapons have been given a shade coat of black, and then I'm going to apply a coat of German grey, leaving some of the black to help frame all these small individual shapes. Now on the boots, that German grey is going to be the highlight, and we won't do any more on the boots. We just need them to have a little bit of depth but to remain basically black. The weapons though need more defined work. And I've taken the same approach to the metal elements of the umbrella. I'm going to assume that umbrellas in the 1940s were the same as umbrellas today and had sort of black struts and black pole. And then to highlight the metallic areas, a very careful and very fine line of a light grey. In this case I'm using London grey, and that's just to give the edges a little bit more definition and the suggestion of a metallic glint. And don't forget the metal elements of the umbrella, though it can be a little bit tricky to reach everything, and you may find some of the details initially don't stand out too strongly to your eye on the sort of camouflage front facing of the umbrella. Now for any leather straps, and there's several on this, such as the rifle, the strap for the submachine gun, the strap that keeps the bottle top on, on the water bottle, I'm going to be using leather brown and with a careful highlight just on the edges of new wood. And then we're going to be coming back to new wood for the rifle stock. I've first of all used a coat of flat earth as a shade colour, and then the new wood is going to be the main colour for that. No need for any highlight here, folks. You don't want it to get too light. You could start off with really dark colours if you wanted and lighten it up from there. I prefer, just to make it stand out more strongly against the background of the figure, just to use the lighter combination of colours I've just described. Now on to the skin, and first thing I should point out is I've used a shade colour for the skin of saddle brown. It's a nice warm deep shade that works well with flesh tones. And then the next thing I paint is going to be the eyes. Painting it at this stage allows us to very easily fix all the niggling little errors that we make with eyes. You can get eyes down perfect first time, but a lot of the time you'll need to do a little bit of adjustment, so do it now when you've just got the shade colour to fix, and your life's going to be a lot easier. Now it's quite tricky to see what I'm doing here, because it can actually be quite tricky to even get your brush in to the eyes depending on the sculpt. Now I use an off-white colour for the eyes. Typically I use deck tan, but anything off-white will work fine. And then when I've painted in that tiny little circle, I put a little line of German Camo black brown through the centre of it, and we can take all the time we need to fix it before we move on to the main flesh colour, which you can see I'm starting to do now, and I'm using Panzer Ace's flesh base. It's important to paint this just like we're painting the uniform. We're going to do a pass where we're going to map everything out, mapping out the shape of the fingers. If it's got an open palm, the shape of the open palm. It's got the back of the hand. You can see the tendons on the back of the hand. It's typically all there for you to see. Now's the chance for you to pick it out, so that when you go in with a second coat, you can firm everything up so you've got a nice opaque finish, and you've got all the details that people are going to recognise there nice and clear to see. On the face you've got the bridge of the nose, the eyebrows, the chin, the lips, the cheeks. And then as a highlight I'm going to be using flat flesh, and as always with the highlights you have to be careful you don't use too much, otherwise it becomes the main colour and not just an accent. So very careful application here, hitting the knuckles, just hitting underneath the eyes for instance, just a little line underneath the eyes, down the bridge of the nose, across the, I don't know what you would call it, but where the cheek meets the nose and the lips, just to define shape. And then to finish off, let's go back to the camouflage on this umbrella. And what I'm doing here is, I'm not doing a dry brush as such. The brush is really wet, it's quite loaded with paint, but I'm carefully just drawing it across the raised surfaces so that I'm getting a nice solid coat, not a sort of sandy, dusty looking coat that you would get from dry brushing. Similar technique, but with a different intention, and it's to get a solid layer down nice and quickly. I'm using medium olive here, but you can be thinking about just about any kind of bright leafy kind of green. Leaves come in many shades of green. The most important thing is that you're giving yourself colours that are going to stand out against the greenish colours of the uniform, so it doesn't become just one shade of green. Make it stand out, make it different to help it frame the whole figure. Now I'm taking some German Camo black brown, and I'm going to start cutting in some deeper areas of shade across the surface we've got here, just to help give it a bit of definition. It's quite a big area, so there's a lot going on, so just going to make some areas a little bit deeper than others. And there's also several strips of fabric that have been attached to the camouflage here, so I'm going to paint them entirely in German Camo Black Brown, so that they're going to stand out strongly when I give them a separate colour, so get a nice sharp definition against the green of the background. And I'm going to use old wood for these strips of fabric, make them stand out strongly against the background, and a little highlight of Iraqi sand will work well on them too. Then a bright green colour will do as a highlight. Any bright green here will do, folks. Don't use the green grey that we used on the uniform, because that just makes it a bit too similar to the uniform. I think I used German Camo Bright Green here, but just keep it in proportion as we always do with the highlights, and it'll help define the shape on something which is quite large in relation to the figure, quite a large item, so we want it to be interesting, and it takes just a little bit of extra work. And that will be us done for this figure, folks. Hopefully you found it interesting. Don't forget to look at the description for any of the colours that I've used. This is, as I've said before, one of a series of videos that we've got for painting bolt action, so don't forget to check out the bolt action playlist on the channel. Thank you all for watching, folks, and if you'd like to hit the subscribe button and the bell button, that means we'll definitely see you all on the next one.